goes inside, scores!
Hands off to Luke Hughes, rips one, he'll score!
Left side slide, he scores! Adam Fantilli equalizes it! McGordy! It was McGordy! Welcome to the first episode of Wolverine Hockey Wednesday. If you're tuning in live, you're listening to 88.3 WCBN-FM Ann Arbor. If not, thank you for tuning in wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we're going to preview the Michigan men's ice hockey season that is soon to get underway with an exhibition contest on Friday the 30th against Simon Fraser University. Saturday the 30th against Simon Fraser University. I'm your host, William Gregory, the managing director of WCBN Sports, joined today by Connor Earegood, managing sports editor at the Michigan Daily and former member of its hockey beat, Owen Crain, executive board member of WCBN Sports and an out-and-out New England hockey guy, and soon to be joined by John Tondora, senior editor at the Michigan Daily, and another former member of its hockey beat who has forgotten his backpack at the Intramural Sports Building, but he will soon join us. So, guys, we're going to preview the Michigan men's ice hockey team, ranked right now in the U.S. College Hockey Organization's preseason number 5, after a, I would say, disappointing end of last season, at least for me and Connor, having both made the trip out to Tampa and a loss to QPAC in the Frozen Four semifinal. The eventual national champion Bobcats, I will say. But this is a team now with a lot of change, especially at the top. We all know superstar Adam Fantilli is off to the Columbus Blue Jackets after being selected 3rd overall in the past entry draft. But you also lose a player like Mackie Samoskevich, who goes to the Carolina Hurricanes, and Luke Hughes as well, along with your starting goaltender in Eric Portillo. So we're going to talk about some of the additions that head coach Brandon Naurato has made, and in his second full season as Michigan head coach, will this team be as good as they have been over the past few seasons? So, guys, what are your initial thoughts about Michigan hockey and their offseason?
Well, it was one of those off seasons. Compared to the last off season, it was not as busy, but obviously there were some whole legal, political kind of context going on there. But the way they used the transfer portal was a little unexpected to me, especially after some conversations with coaching staff during the season. But I feel like this team has a lot of talent on it still. Rutger McGordy, Frank Nazar, Seamus Casey, those are a lot of guys who can really, I don't want to say elevate the program from last year, but they can step in and fill the same roles that some of the guys who left for the NHL are kind of left behind.
I share that same view of this team. It's great to see Naurato officially elevated to head coach. Of course, there was that uncertainty for a long time with this program. They didn't do it until right before the Frozen Four, I believe. So that stability with a head coach filling that role this year will certainly be something I'm looking forward to for this team. I think we knew that was coming for a long time. But again, that stability will be good for the long-term success of this team. And I'm excited to see a few changes. I'm very excited to see the second Duke brother join this team, Tyler Duke, transferring over from that team down south. And I think he saw which way the tides were turning. And like you said, plenty of superstar talent has left this team, and they will miss them at times, but the transfer portal over the summer was quite interesting. They've got a good core, and this is a team that, despite having all those superstars, really worked together well as a cohesive unit, and I'm excited to see them continue that style of play this year.
Yeah, and if I can add too, I mean, the coaching staff this year also got, I don't want to say stronger, but at least follows the identity that Brandon Naurato wants to follow with this team. Matt Deschamps from the Chicago Steel is going to work with the defense. He worked with guys like Owen Power with the Steel. And then if you look at Kevin Reiter, who worked for the USA National Team Development Program, was a scout, works with goalies, really, really talented coach, well-respected. Sorry, John's getting his microphone set.
We welcome John Tondora, senior sports editor at the Michigan Daily, who has successfully retrieved his bag from the IM, and we welcome John to the first episode of this program. Having a little bit of trouble with that.
A little headset difficulty here.
But I guess I want to get into some of these grad transfers first. We mentioned Tyler Duke, one of the undergrad transfers, but I think this team right now one of the biggest question marks heading into this season is the goaltender situation. We see Andrew Albano and Jacob Barchevsky, who have transferred in from Norwich, a D3 hockey school, and Canisius, which is Division I, coming in to fill the holes left by Eric Portillo, but then also some of the backup goaltender situation, which has been in flux as of recent. So what do you guys think about the Wolverines' goalie spot heading into this 2023-2024 season?
I feel like, I'm conflicted here. At Canisius, Jacob Barchevsky was really, really good. If you look at goalie win shares, if you look at some of the adjusted advanced analytics, he was among some of the country's best, and especially for guys that were in the portal. It's one of those situations for Michigan where Portillo was going to leave. He was going to go to the NHL. He was, not to say ready, but college wasn't exactly like his spot he needed to be in terms of development. Maybe he wants to see something different in the AHL, or I don't think he's going to be an NHL backup this year. But with Barchevsky, they were able to bring him in from the portal. He has these really good numbers from last season. I'll admit I haven't exactly watched him play like 30 games or anything, so I'm not going to say if he's the answer. But when you have an inexperienced backup in Noah West, who only played 3 games in the past 2 seasons, he's a really good option. He took Canisius to an Atlantic Hockey Championship. They ended up getting shelled by Minnesota first round. Someone was going to have to lose to Minnesota that year, so or last year, I guess. But he feels like someone who could really kind of elevate the goaltending room. They said they're going to do like a tandem thing with him and West. So I'm curious to see who wins it in the end, but they do have talent in the goalie room, even if it's not really like settled out just yet before the season.
And Tyler Shea was another goalie in the rotation who transferred to Brown, no longer with the Wolverines. So what does the second transfer edition of Albano mean when you are pulling in a guy like Barchevsky and you have Noah West still on the roster? Obviously, you miss out on Trey Augustine, who's a fantastic goalie prospect taken by the Wings in the last entry draft. What do you guys think, if Barchevsky falters, what the backup plan may be?
With all due respect to Andrew Albino, and hi, this is John Tondora coming in from the IM, coming in from my missing backpack. That's still missing, but we think I sent in another Michigan Daily writer on the case. Shout out Sam Novotny. But with all due respect to Albano, I think coming in as a D3 transfer from a military school in the Northeast, no less, I think it has a lot more to do with a culture fit necessarily than a playing fit. He's a guy that's an engineering major. He comes from this military background. He's clearly going to bring a level of discipline that perhaps is something Brendan Arado felt was lacking with a younger squad last year. And to answer your question more directly, if it doesn't work out between Barchevsky or Noah West, I think you're in a bit of a tight position here if you're Michigan. But to echo kind of what Connor already mentioned, they both are high floor, low ceiling guys in that perhaps they're not going to have that game where Eric Portillo would be kind of flailing around the net and would really wow you with some of his stops, but they're also not going to have games that, you know, as Michigan fans saw at the hands of Quinnipiac last year, 2 are going to bounce in behind his back, some it's going to look like he's sleeping at the wheel, so there might be a little less higher of highs, but the volatility won't be there as much as it was with Portillo.
Neither of you guys, I mean, you covered this team really in depth last year, and I didn't go to enough games to really see Noah West take enough shots to have a fully informed opinion on his playing ability. But where is everyone standing on this? You got a prediction?
Prediction's tough, right? Because, I mean, Noah West only played the 3 games he played back-to-back against Penn State, where it's a team that will shoot from anywhere and everywhere. I'm pretty sure their goalie would take a shot the way their team kind of plays, but then he ended up playing Harvard in a 4-4 tie the Friday before the Ohio State football game. So probably for a freshman squad, probably a little distracted game, but is what it is. He's not necessarily the most cerebral goalie. Like, he's not in the net, making paddle saves, and like he doesn't look like Dominik Hasek or anything, but he is very I guess structured. He stays in position and comes up with stops. Sometimes he looks a little, I don't want to say nervous, but maybe not as comfortable in the net as a guy like Portillo was. Granted, he had played every game of his sophomore year. So obviously he's going to be a little bit comfortable. But I feel like with West, it's just getting him comfortable, getting him in the net and seeing what he can do. Nerado was pretty adamant that they're going to start as a tandem when he had been talked to over the summer by Sam Stockton of Gulo Gulo Hockey and the Hockey News. Give him a plug, give him a follow. But yeah, Nard mentioned they're gonna probably do a tandem situation and see who wins. So whatever West did last season, we'll see what he does this year.
And you could be liable to see him on the wing if everybody goes down with illness, like we saw him on the line chart.
Oh yeah, with Shea. Yeah,
that was a wild game, man.
Oh, so let's look at some of the other transfers. Chase Pletsky from Miami of Ohio, Marshall Warren, former Boston College captain, D-man, and then the two undergraduate transfers, Tyler Duke from Ohio State and Josh Earnese. Am I saying that right?
I think it's Earnese. I'm not totally sure. I haven't read it yet.
From St. Thomas in Minnesota. We'll get into the freshmen after, but which of these transfers besides the goalies are you most excited about? I know for me it's Marshall Warren being a former captain and kind of the weakness this team showed on defense in the Frozen Four semifinal. But curious as to what you guys think about these additions.
Yeah, certainly. I think, Marshall Warren's definitely one that should give excitement to Wolverine fans, but just to echo a different sentiment, I think Josh Earnese is the guy who I'm really going to look at. Coach Nerado spoke a lot last year about the need for secondary scoring that maybe doesn't come outside of those superstars that I know you guys have been talking about earlier. And so Josh Earnese, he's a guy where he might not be putting up, 20, 25 goals this season, but if he has like 15 and they come in nice spots, he's going to generate a lot of assists. He's a strong offensive mind. And then what kind of is the cherry on the cake is that it's going to come from the third line, and that's where you're not going to mind it so much. Now, if he was tasked with that first line role like he was in St. Thomas, it's a little bit different, but here in Michigan, he doesn't have to be the superstar of his team, and I think that's where he'll really hit his stride on a Michigan team that, third and fourth line were pretty much non-starters in terms of offensive production last year.
Yeah, I'll agree with everything John said, and I'll say this too, like, the way he has seemingly chemistry with Jackson Hallam, who's probably going to be that third-line left wing, is super interesting. They're both kids from Eagan, Minnesota, which is a suburb of Minneapolis. I think it's Minneapolis. It might be St. Paul. Either way, it's the Twin Cities. And potentially they could be centered by a guy in Garrett Shifsky, who we'll talk about later. He's a freshman who's from Minnesota. You could have a Minnesota line in Michigan, which is crazy considering how well the 6 or 7 schools out there recruit their own state. So obviously there's some recruiting and transfer wins by Michigan there. Not that being from Minnesota makes them better, but as we've seen, Minnesota produces some absolute studs. But I'll go with a different guy. I'll echo Warren, or I'll echo William on the Marshall Warren hype train. I think as a former captain, he's a big leader, as well as being someone on the left side who adds a little bit of stability throughout the lineup. If he wasn't on this roster, you would be putting Tyler Duke as your absolute third pairing defenseman on that left side. They have Truscott and Edwards ahead of both of them, I would say. So when you have Tyler Duke playing consistent minutes, some of his defensive flaws can show versus using him in that seventh defense spot. If you use him as the extra skater, you can really use him tactically, positionally on the power play. You can use him to just go hit someone. You can use him to his strengths versus having him get kind of exposed defensively. And I think that's where Marshall Warren, I believe he was the first transfer they picked up too, but Marshall Warren really adds something to this team.
And just to talk on Earnese for another minute, he played both on the penalty kill and the power play for St. Thomas. 21 points, 14 goals, 7 assists for that team before coming over. And I want to move into the freshmen. Tyler Duke, obviously Dylan Duke's brother. I think you'll hear enough of that throughout the year. But the 4 freshmen I'm also very interested in, and Connor mentioned Garrett Shifsky, but Nick Moldenauer, I think, had the most hype playing on the steel with a few other Michigan players winning the title in that league in the USHL in 2021. Josh Orico and Tanner Rowe also. So what about these freshmen excites you to replace? I mean, Michigan was a team, and a lot of it came from Adam Fantilli, but over half of the point production came from freshman players, and losing Fantilli obviously is a big thing, but do you expect a similar style of play from Michigan this year from their freshman class?
Well, I think last year a lot centered around Fantilli, and Michigan was a gritty team. They could play as a unit, but Fantilli consistently was leading these games. He was coming up huge, and I think that's why it's important to have people like Moldenhauer. We have seen the hype around him. He's not an Adam Fantilli, but this team needs point scorers. They need people who can put the puck in the net, and no matter how much you talk about needing those secondary lines or utility players to come out big, someone has to lead the team in scoring, and I certainly think that those are roles that need to be looked at, and Moldenhauer is something who should, I guess kind of a pun, fit that mold decently well.
Yeah. No one's going to do what Adam did last season. I mean, the best freshman year since Jack Eichel. Maybe Macklin Celebrini does that for BU this year, but we'll see. I feel like Moldenhauer is going to be a really good fit without Mackie Samoskevich on the roster. With him going to Florida, it opened up a really big spot for a guy who can shoot, a guy who can really play that right wing position. I think Gavin Brindley's still going to play the right. He could play center, but I feel like he's going to stick on the right. That's where he was successful. He'll play with Frankie and Rutger. But in terms of what Moldenhauer can do, I think on that second line with a guy like TJ Hughes, with a guy like Dylan Duke, he could really take Mackie's spot and kind of produce immediately. He's quick. He's a 200-foot player. And I wouldn't necessarily say he's a sniper, more of a playmaker type, but he's going to be put in spots where he can shoot it. He's going to be put in spots where he can score. And I think for a freshman who was really dominating the USHL last year when he wasn't injured, that's going to be a really beneficial spot for him to be in from the start.
Yeah, and I just want to say, you mentioned Florida Panthers. I mistakenly said Mac Hughes on the Hurricanes. That's only because I was confused with Charlotte Checkers, their AHL affiliate who he played for. Yeah. But that's, a mistake. What about Orico, Tanner Rowe, and Shifsky? Connor, I know you mentioned Shifsky earlier. What do you think about the rest of the class?
I think with Orico and Rowe, those are more long-term pieces, especially Orico. I think Rowe could play more of a penalty kill role. That's what he was recruited for. That's what he's good at. From Calumet, Michigan, joins a
shout out
back in the day, old Michigan hockey when they were winning pretty much every national title when there were like very minimal teams playing in the Frozen Four. But back then there were a lot of Yoopers on those squads, so kind of following that tradition with Rowe. I know some of the Michigan accounts that are from the UP. Drew, if you're listening, I don't know if you are. I don't know where you're at right now in the country, but if you're listening, I know you're excited. So.
Great barn up there now. I know that they recently remodeled that whole area, and I've been to Calumet. It's a cool town, very interesting. Copper country, old way of living. I think they have one of the oldest brick roads in the state of Michigan that's still existing. So if you ever go to Calumet, check a hockey game and check out the brick road up there.
Road trip.
Yeah, William Gregory fun facts for you today, huh?
So I think that's good for the additions and the departures in terms of individual players. But in the last 12 or so minutes we have, I want to talk about the team as a whole. And I know it's not Brendan Arato's second full season, but he coached almost all of last year under the interim tag, but was still the head coach. And I know that it's not his responsibility entirely that Michigan has not performed well in Frozen Four semifinal games recently. But is this a team, first of all, that you think can get back to that level even after losing Fantilli, or is this just more of a regional playoff team? So what are your general expectations for where this team will go this season in the postseason?
If you look at how Michigan played in the past two regional finals, Eric Portillo stood on his head against Quinnipiac until former Michigan coach that I'm not going to name decided to just put a bunch of seniors out and let them ice out the clock, and then Quinnipiac came back in 2022. Portillo was standing on his head before then. Last year, back in was it March? It was like a 2-1 overtime win by Michigan, and I'm pretty sure Portillo saved 15 to 16 shots in the first period. Stood on his head. I think that's going to dictate where this team goes in the postseason. I think they can get there. They just got to get the goaltending in order to put together a run.
Yeah, I'll agree with that too. I do think though, I'm not sure if you were looking for predictions necessarily, Will, but in terms of goaltending, I do believe that the goaltending will be improved on some level simply because I think you're going to see a defensive core that's a lot more focused on defense. for all that Luke Hughes is great, and he is definitely a special product, a special player out there on the ice, his defensive ability was not for a lack of skill set, but at times could potentially look like for a lack of trying, whether it was turnovers at the blue line that led to breakaways or one-on-ones or putting Jacob Truscott kind of on the back foot there. When you have chances like those that kind of go away, I do wonder if you're going to see goaltending that almost looks even better at times than it did with Eric Portillo, simply because you have a tighter defensive unit around, whether it be Barshevsky, Noah West, or if Albino can even step in there at times.
So do you guys think, losing the production of Samoskevich and Fantilli is huge. Do you think that production, at least in the aggregate, is somewhat there this season, or is that just too much offense to recreate? Fantilli was so special. It seemed like he was a one of one every time he stepped on the ice. At least that's what I thought. But what do you guys think about Michigan's offensive potential with McGroarty and Brindley, some of those freshmen coming back, but then also the additions?
Yeah, I go back and forth on this a lot because I think it comes down to postseason hockey in general, whether it's better to just outscore all your problems or whether you really need to play, tight, physical, checking hockey and really be able to lock everyone down. I feel like with Frank Nazar making steps this offseason, he looked incredible in Plymouth for the World Junior Summer Showcase. I think he can recoup a lot of the offensive production with a healthy offseason, being at full strength, starting the season from October or September 30th this year, like being with the team from the start. I think he can recoup some of the scoring. I don't think all, but some of it. But he plays such a solid 200-foot game defensively that I think he's going to be a good contributor in that sense. That Fantilli, not that he was like bad defensively, but the way he played, it really wasn't his role. Nazar really owns his defense and takes pride in that, and I think that's going to be a good, I don't want to call it a culture change, but a good effect of playing him more.
I'm interested this year to see if maybe there is a little bit less offense, but you both mentioned the defensive unit playing a little tighter in and protecting the goaltender, of course, with all the questions going around over who will start. I'm interested to see if this team can get a little bit more consistent, because we definitely saw a little bit of a lack of consistency, especially around the defense last year. And I think that's kind of emblematic of what happened in the Frozen Four, is things, they fell apart at times, but this was a team that would randomly drop a game. They would be on a hot streak, and then, boom, there goes one. You drop a few spots of the rankings, and then they bounce right back up. It would happen, but that lack of consistency, I think, is something that hurt them. And what I can't tell is that something that will be repaired, or is that just here to stay this year?
I think that's something that Narado is definitely looking to repair, and I think he would tell you that it's kind of the fluctuations of a young team out there. It's difficult to know how true that is. Of course, we're not on the inside, but Narado kind of always emphasized the idea of buy-in, which is something I'm sure every coach emphasizes. If your guys aren't bought in, how can you be expected to succeed? But when you have guys necessarily maybe a little further away from the Adam Fantillis of the world, but who are perhaps a little more involved in the offensive scheme. Narado told Connor and I a lot about how no one teaches offense. That was kind of one of his catchphrases, that no one teaches offense correctly. I wonder how much being able to learn those schemes over an entire offseason will really end up translating into consistent point production, consistent displays of success.
I'll say, too, it does just go back to maturity. When you come to college as a freshman, like everyone who's been a student knows, it's really hard to be consistent because there's so many things that are changing. There's so many things you're exposed to. It's a super high energy environment, so it's really hard to buckle in. To give an example, so the predecessors to last year's team, that 2022 Frozen Four run with the likes of Matty Beniers, Brendan Brisson, Kent Johnson, Owen Power, you know all the names. They were only like a 500 team in the COVID year, the season prior. And granted, it's the COVID year. Granted, they don't have the children of Yost cheering them on and making it one of the most exciting barns in hockey. So maybe they would have won a few more games like that. But it goes to show that like you can be inconsistent your freshman year and then put together what became, I think, the record season for wins for the Michigan program that next year. So I think that, I'm not saying they're going to set a record or anything, but I do think they can get a lot more consistent just through getting older.
Okay, so we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left to go on this broadcast. Thank you all for joining us on 88.3 WCBN-FM Ann Arbor. I wanted to go through the pre-winter break schedule for Michigan, given that there's a month-long break between December and January. So I'm going to throw out some of the series. I threw out, I'm not going to mention Lindenwood and Stonehill. They're cupcakes. A bit upset that Lake Superior State isn't another trip.
Devastated.
How about Western? Where's Western?
Anything else would be cooler than Stonehill and Lindenwood, two programs who are just starting up. But first on the schedule after the exhibition game against Simon Fraser, number 18 Providence, who missed out on the NCAA tournament by just a little bit last year, at UMass in Amherst, the first road set for the Wolverines. Number 13 Ohio State is the opener for Michigan in the Big Ten. How physical will they be after a few games, namely the face-off on the lake where Michigan just looked outmatched physically? At Wisconsin under new head coach Mike Hastings, who comes over from Minnesota State with 3 players after Tony Granato was fired. Then home against number 3 Minnesota, who is still very good even without Matthew Nyes and Logan Cooley. Number 16 Penn State on the road against number 8 Minnesota St. Cloud. And finally, wrapping up the early slate of games, number 20 Notre Dame, who always seems to have Michigan's number at home. But this one is in South Bend. Give me a series real quick, about a minute each for you guys, that you are looking forward to this season.
That's a good question. Anyone else?
I can jump out right ahead. I'm looking at Minnesota in Ann Arbor. I think last year, we touched on it a little bit earlier. You have this kind of flu, RVS, what have you, some sort of sickness that kind of took out the whole program. Michigan goes 0-2, but it was kind of as expected. It was something that was easy to brush off, and of course there were serious complications that came along with that virus, of course, but it was something Michigan, from a playing standpoint, could say this is not a true showing of who we are. Now, bar anything of that nature again hurting Michigan, you're going to see a matchup of 2 heavyweights. Minnesota is frankly a little pissed that they've lost 2 consecutive Big Ten championships at home. Now this is their opportunity, even though it's sans Cole Iserman, but maybe we can touch on that a different day. It's their opportunity to come into Ann Arbor and show that they're still a force to be reckoned with in the Big Ten, even after the departure of some of their bigger players.
All right, Connor and Owen, real quick, and then I want to get a season prediction from you guys.
I'll pick Providence. I think Providence is a top 10 team. I think that they're a sleeping giant. Owen, I think, was going to say the same thing.
Of course, I was going to say the same.
Rhode Island native.
Dude, they have a goalie coming back who played pretty well his freshman year. They added Luke Chris from Brown, who was their captain and one of their best defensemen. Riley Duren's a stud. Connor Kelly came from Duluth. Yaroslav Schmelar, something like that. He's a Czech guy. Played fantastic last season. There's so much talent. I think they had like 20 guys go to NHL dev camps that were graduates, that were freshmen, anyone like related to the program. That's such a good team, and to play them for your first regular season series, I think Michigan's going to learn a lot about their team.
I second all of that. Providence has always been able to put together a very skilled, normally a very fast offense, and I think they'll be a good challenge for this team. And as a son of Rhode Island, I got to pick them.
Okay, so I just want to shout out Jimmy Snuggerud, Minnesota, going to be probably their leading goal scorer. And I wanted to shout out David Kramer because Snuggerud is a Blues prospect, and David always made sure to keep tabs on him throughout the year.
Play your game, Jimmy.
So really quick, we got about 90 seconds. Give me a general season prediction for the Michigan Wolverines this season.
I got ripped on Twitter for this, but 3rd in the Big Ten behind Minnesota and Wisconsin. I know that's a hot take. I think they're going to make a regional final, and I think they're going to lose. I don't know if the goaltending's there.
I'll go ahead and say 2nd in the Big Ten. I've bet against Michigan before, i.e. last year, and then was made to look silly for it. I think they're still a competitor. I think a regional final and maybe beyond.
I agree. This is a team to trust. I really like the coaching style right now, and I'm excited to watch them come together on the ice.
Okay. I think, as the host, maybe I'm not supposed to throw a prediction out there, but I want to see them in the regionals again. I think they'll get there. I don't know about a specific Big Ten standing. I know Connor said Wisconsin being 2nd place, and I think they're an improved team with their new head coach. And they showed some spunk in the Big Ten tournament against Michigan. But for Owen Crain, John Tondora, Connor Earegood, I want to thank you guys all for being here for the first episode of Wolverine Hockey Wednesday. We're going to do 10 episodes up until about December 6th, and then take a break for the end of the semester. We will be back next Wednesday at 6 o'clock for the second episode of this program with a few members of the women's hockey team, including, hopefully, goaltender Sandrine Poneth, who was the team MVP last year. Thank you all for tuning in. And again, as always, go Blue.